I'm Sylvia Moreno, 68 years old, a former federal prosecutor once called by the press the woman who made Wall Street go silent. But justice comes with a price, and mine was my marriage, my reputation, and my faith in people. I left the courtroom the day I discovered my husband, a defense attorney, had sold my case files to the opposing side. Now I live quietly in New Jersey, teaching law for free to underprivileged students. I thought the past was buried, but it seems it just decided to dig itself back up. The courtroom was packed rows of polished wooden benches, creaking under the weight of people who had come not for justice, but for spectacle. Cameras were forbidden, but that didn't stop the whispers, the rustle of cheap notebooks, the sound of pens ready to carve gossip into headlines. At the defense table, Clara Ruiz leaned back in her tailored navy suit, one leg crossed elegantly over the other. Her lips curved into a smirk as she watched Brandon being wheeled in by the bailiff. Careful, she murmured, voice loud enough for those in the first row to hear. "Wouldn't want you to fall again, honey. You're already half broken." Laughter rippled through her side of the room. Brandon's hands gripped the armrests of his wheelchair until his knuckles whitened. He didn't look up. Then the doors at the back opened. A slow, deliberate thud of heels against marble. The room turned toward the sound as if gravity had shifted. Sylvia Moreno stepped inside. Her gray suit was simple, but the cut sharp enough to slice tension. A leather briefcase hung from her hand, old-worn, the kind of thing you'd expect from another era. The guards at the door froze. Even the court clerk stopped typing. At the judge's bench, Caldwell, the man who once clerked for her decades ago, blinked as though seeing a ghost. His gavel hovered mid-air, his lips parted in disbelief. "Miss Moreno," he said, his voice trembling. "Why? Are you here?" The words struck the room like a dropped chandelier, shattering silence, freezing everyone in its echo. Clara's confident smile faltered. "Beatrice Torres." Her lawyer shifted uneasily, whispering, "That can't be her. She retired 20 years ago." Sylvia didn't answer. She walked forward, each footstep deliberate, the air bending around her presence. Her briefcase clicked open as she reached the plaintiff's table. She placed it down next to Brandon with a firm thud. The sound reverberated through the room, final, declarative, the way thunder closes a storm. Sylvia looked at the judge, calm and unshaken. "Good morning, Your Honor." Judge Caldwell swallowed hard, his composure slipping. He nodded once. "Good. Morning, Ms. Moreno." Then voiceover low and measured. "I used to train him. I never thought I'd see this day." The scene held for a moment longer, the cold air thick with memory and power before it 24 hours earlier. The small apartment smelled faintly of burnt coffee and sea salt from the harbor below. Sylvia stood by the window, buttoning her blazer. The morning light bounced off the glass, catching silver in her hair, like threads of quiet lightning. Her reflection stared back at her. Not the feared prosecutor of Manhattan's criminal division, not the woman who once dismantled an entire corporate fraud empire with a single closing argument. Just a 68-year-old widow with a spine of steel and a past that refused to stay buried. On the table beside her sat the same leather briefcase from the courtroom, its edges scuffed, the lock faintly dented. She placed a folder inside, slid in a fountain pen, and closed it gently. When it latched, it made that familiar thud, a sound she hadn't heard in years. It echoed through the small room like an old friend clearing its throat. She exhaled. "All right, old girl," she muttered. "One last time." From the kitchen came the voice of Aiden Cross, her former investigator, now semi-retired, semi-drunk, and entirely impossible to ignore. "You sure about this?" he asked, leaning in the doorway with a mug that read, "Detective-ish." They called it a civil case. You walk in there, you'll turn it into a war. Sylvia smirked without looking up. "Then I suppose I should dress for battle." Aiden chuckled, watching her sling the briefcase over her shoulder. Still dramatic, still terrifying. He tilted his head. "You know Caldwell owes you his entire career. If you show up unannounced, the poor man might faint." "That's his problem," she said dryly, tightening her blazer. He should have chosen a quieter line of work. Aiden sipped his coffee. And what about your son, Brandon, doesn't know you're walking into that courtroom, does he? Sylvia paused just long enough to glance out the window. The morning fog rolled over the docks, swallowing the distant cranes. No, she admitted softly. He's lost enough already. I don't want him worrying about the past I buried. Aiden raised a brow. Buried? You mean temporarily misplaced? You've never buried anything in your life. She gave him a look, the kind that used to silence entire witness stands. Watch it, Cross, he grinned. Yes, ma'am, just saying. If you really wanted to stay retired, you wouldn't be wearing those courtroom shoes. Sylvia looked down. The same black heels she'd worn the day she won her last federal case. The leather still held the faint scars of years pacing marble floors. She sighed. They're comfortable. They're dangerous, he countered. Like you. He walked over, handed her the mug of coffee. At least drink this before you go scare half the justice system. She took it, her hand steady. I don't scare people, Aiden. He raised an eyebrow. You sure? Because rumor says even defense attorneys used to cross the street when they saw you coming. Sylvia smiled thinly, taking a sip. That was in New York. This is New Jersey. Here they don't cross the street. They just hide behind subpoenas. Aiden burst out laughing. God, I miss this version of you. Her expression softened slightly. Don't get sentimental on me now. Who's sentimental? He shrugged. I just like watching the legend unretire herself over burnt coffee. She checked her watch. 8:05 a.m. Time to go. Sylvia placed the empty mug in the sink, wiped her hands on a dish towel, and reached for the briefcase. Cross, she said, pausing by the door. If anyone asks where I'm going, he interrupted, I'll tell them you're out scaring the devil back into hiding. She shot him a sideways look. Tell them I'm late for church. He laughed. Same difference. As she opened the door, he called after her tone, light teasing but fond. You sure you're not just going to scare the judge again? She didn't turn around, just lifted her hand in a half wave and said, That depends on how guilty he looks. The sound of her heels echoing down the hallway. The briefcase thuds once more as she disappears into the morning light. The world once knew Sylvia Moreno by another title, the Iron Prosecutor of Manhattan. Headlines called her ruthless. Defendants called her terrifying. And inside the Department of Justice, even the crooked ones whispered her name the way sailors whisper about storms, half fear, half respect. The memory comes back to her like thunder through glass. The city roared beneath a summer storm. Sirens wailed through the canyons of Wall Street, and reporters screamed into microphones as black sedans pulled up to the steps of the courthouse. Inside, Sylvia walked down the hallway flanked by federal agents. Her hair was pinned tight, her briefcase clutched in one hand, the sound of her heels cutting through chaos. An aide ran beside her, breathless. Ma'am, the media's outside. They're calling this the trial of the decade. She didn't slow down. Then let's make sure it's also the lesson of the decade. They burst into the conference room. Maps, bank transfers, offshore account names, photos all taped to the wall. Sylvia pointed at a red circle on the board. Alvarez Holdings. That's where the bribe money lands. Freeze it before they move again. Already on it, said Agent Brenner. But their lawyer's playing dirty. He's got your husband on the advisory team. Sylvia froze for half a second. My husband. Yes, ma'am. Richard Moreno. The same one. For the first time in her career, she blinked twice. Just twice. Then her jaw set. Then he's not my husband anymore. Now he's opposing counsel. A black SUV speeding through the rain. Sylvia's in the back seat, laptop open, files spilling over her lap. The driver weaves through traffic. Ma'am, we can't catch him. The suspect's already in a cab heading uptown. She slams the laptop shut. Then we take a cab too. The driver stares. You want me to chase another taxi? She shrugs deadpan. Don't worry. I charge this ride to justice. The agent groans. That's not how expense reports work. Then make it work. Cue the chaos taxi's honking rain slashing the windshield. Sylvia leaning forward like a general in the middle of war. The city blurs into streaks of light and sound until the cabs screech to a stop outside a high-rise. Sylvia steps out, first soaked, but calm. She adjusts her blazer, looks up at the suspect being cuffed. "Mr. Alvarez," she says smoothly, "you're under arrest for thinking you were smarter than paperwork." He spits toward the ground. "You can't prove anything." She smiles. "That's why I brought a printer." The trial made headlines for months. Corruption ring dismantled, 3 senators indicted, 1 empire collapsed, and in the middle of it all, Sylvia Moreno standing before flashing cameras, refusing interviews, her wedding ring notably absent. A reporter shouted, "Is it true your husband represented the defense?" She paused at the courthouse steps. The rain finally stopped, the world holding its breath. "Yes," she said, her tone cool and precise. Conflict of interest resolved itself. The crowd laughed, unsure if she was joking. She wasn't. Montage. Sylvia cleaning out her office late at night, packing law books into boxes labeled, "Do not forget." A photo of her and Richard smiling, once young and foolish, tossed into the trash. She hands her badge to the Attorney General. "I'm done chasing ghosts." A silent cab ride home. Streetlights flicker across her face like confessions. Voiceover. "I left the courtroom, but justice never left me. Some people retire, others just take a quieter battlefield." Sylvia sat by the window of her apartment as the sun bled orange into the harbor. Her phone buzzed once, then again, 3 missed calls from an unknown number. She sighed, picked it up. "Ms. Moreno," a nervous voice said. "This is Officer Daniels from Hudson Memorial. You're listed as the emergency contact for Brandon Moreno." Her spine straightened. "Yes." "What happened?" "There's been an accident. A car collision outside Newark. He's stable, but he's asking for you." For a second, everything inside her went quiet. The tide outside crashed against the docks like it remembered something she'd forgotten. She ended the call, grabbed her coat, and within minutes was out the door. Hospital corridor, fluorescent lights, antiseptic smell, footsteps echoing. Brandon sat in a wheelchair by the window, bandaged arm-bruised cheek. He looked older than his 34 years, or maybe just exhausted from loving the wrong person too long. "Mom," he murmured when she appeared in the doorway, "you shouldn't have come." "Nonsense," Sylvia said, kneeling slightly. "You look terrible. I raised you better than that." He managed a weak smile. "Still dramatic, I see." "Genetics," she replied, taking his hand gently. "What happened, Clara?" She wanted the house, the trust, everything Dad left. When I said no, she said she'd get it legally. Next thing I know, her lawyer's filing for divorce. Sylvia's lips tightened. On what grounds she claims I'm mentally unfit after the crash? Sylvia let out a low whistle. Classic. Destroy the man, claim the assets. Brandon looked down, ashamed. "I didn't want to drag you into this." She stood. "You didn't drag me anywhere, son. I'm walking in on my own." He looked up, eyes glistening. "Mom, you promised you'd never go back to court." Sylvia adjusted her blazer, that old prosecutor's fire flickering behind her calm voice. "I said I'd never need to." Then she added softly, almost to herself, "But some lessons people refuse to learn until they meet the woman who never lost. They thought I'd retired. But justice doesn't age. It just waits for the next case." The scent of brewed coffee and disinfectant didn't belong in the same room, but Sylvia had never cared much for perfect combinations. She poured a cup anyway, the steam curling up between her fingers like a small, stubborn ghost. Across the kitchen island, Brandon scrolled through an online medical forum with his one good hand. He still looked pale, a mixture of painkillers, exhaustion, and quiet humiliation. "Mom," he said, wincing as he adjusted his arm brace, "you're the only lawyer I know who can burn both evidence and coffee." Sylvia arched an eyebrow. "That's libel counselor Junior." "I'm serious," he said, sniffing his cup. "This tastes like something you could depose as a hostile witness." She smirked, stirring sugar into her mug. "It's the roast of accountability, a bit strong for people who prefer denial." Brandon chuckled despite the pain. You always make trauma sound poetic. Occupational hazard. The house was small but tasteful, a 3-bedroom colonial in the suburbs, with the kind of manicured hedges that made neighbors assume happiness lived inside. Sylvia never liked it. Too quiet, too controlled. Every shelf was lined with scented candles and framed affirmations like "family first," a phrase she'd started to mistrust the moment Clara began using it. Brandon tried to break the silence. "You don't have to stay long, Mom. I can manage after a few days." Sylvia didn't look up from her notes. Manage what? Painkillers, divorce papers, or your wife's new hobby of pretending you don't exist. He sighed. You make it sound like a crime scene. Everything's a crime scene until proven otherwise, she said, flipping a legal pad closed. Just then, the front door clicked open. The sound of heels, sharp, rhythmic, territorial. Clara Ruiz Moreno walked in, sunglasses perched like armor. Her voice sliced through the stillness. "Oh, I see. You're still here." Sylvia didn't flinch. "Morning, Clara." Clara smiled tightly. "It's afternoon, actually." She placed her purse on the counter as if marking her territory. "I didn't realize we were turning the kitchen into a courtroom." Sylvia set down her cup. "Don't worry, I left the gavel at home." Brandon shot his mother a warning look, one that said, "Please not now." Clara turned to him, softening instantly. "How's your arm, darling?" He nodded, cautious. "Better." Mom made breakfast. Oh, Clara's gaze flicked to the counter, then to the pile of legal papers beside it. "Looks delicious. Paperwork a la toast?" Sylvia smiled thinly. "Fiber-rich. Keeps you regular, morally speaking." Clara ignored her and leaned closer to Brandon. "You should rest upstairs, honey. Doctor said no stress." "I'm fine down here." Her voice cooled by a degree. "You're not. You need to rest." Brandon hesitated, then wheeled himself toward the hall. "I'll go lie down for a bit." As soon as he disappeared up the stairs, Clara's smile fell off like cheap wallpaper. So she said, crossing her arms, "How long are you planning to stay?" Sylvia took her time answering, straightening a stack of documents on the table. "Until my son can walk without collapsing." Clara tilted her head. "I meant legally. This is our home. You're a guest here now." The word hit like a slap, calm, deliberate, poisonous. Sylvia's eyes narrowed, though her face remained composed. "A guest," she repeated softly. "Interesting choice of term, considering my name is still on the title deed." Clara smirked. "Was." "Brandon's handling the transfer next week. You'll want to check your paperwork." Sylvia didn't move. "You're right." She turned toward the drawer under the island, the one she'd organized herself months ago, and pulled out a thin folder edges, worn the smell of ink, faint but familiar. She laid it on the counter between them, fingers tapping once-twice precisely. "You know," she said, voice low but cutting, "I've always believed paperwork speaks louder than promises." For a split second, Clara's confident posture faltered, but she recovered quickly, tossing her hair. "We'll see about that." Sylvia smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Yes," she murmured, "we will." The air in the kitchen thickened. Outside, a lawnmower droned somewhere down the street, the ordinary sound of suburbia pressing against the quiet tension inside. Clara grabbed her purse. "I have a meeting. Try not to burn the house down while I'm gone." Sylvia lifted her mug. "I only burn what's corrupt." The door slammed behind her. Brandon called from upstairs. "Everything okay, perfectly fine," Sylvia replied. "Your wife just reminded me I'm a guest." He groaned. "Mom?" She gathered the folders from the counter, her motions calm, surgical. "Don't worry, guests can still read fine print." Later that evening, Sylvia sat in the study, Clara's so-called wellness room, filled with candles and faux bamboo. The irony wasn't lost on her. She opened her laptop, typed in the address of the county registrar, and cross-referenced property transfers for the last 6 months. Clara's name appeared twice. 2 homes, one under her maiden name, one under an LLC Ruiz Management Group. Sylvia exhaled slowly. The old shell company trick. She reached for her notebook and began jotting notes in her tidy, compact handwriting. Her phone buzzed a message from Mr. Chen. "Got your voicemail. We'll prepare preliminary injunction in case of title fraud. Stay calm, Sylvia." She smiled faintly. Calm. I invented calm. Hours later, the house went quiet. The ticking of the clock mixed with the rhythmic creak of Brandon's wheelchair upstairs. Sylvia looked toward the family photo on the mantel. Brandon smiling, Clara radiant beside him, her own reflection ghosted over the glass. They built this house with love. Then they furnished it with lies. But foundations don't crumble overnight, especially when the blueprint was mine. She reached out, straightened the photo ever so slightly, and whispered to the still room. Paperwork speaks louder than promises. Then she closed her laptop, the screen reflecting a calm, calculated smile, the kind of smile that always came right before a case began. The clock in the hallway struck 11. The house was supposed to be asleep, but Sylvia's instincts, the same ones that once made her a legend in the courtroom, refused to rest. She sat in the guest room's armchair, reading through old case files, the edges yellowed like cigarette smoke. The soft hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the faint whisper of the wind through the blinds made the silence feel almost civilized, until she heard it, a muffled voice, then another. It was coming from Chloe's room just down the hall. Sylvia closed her folder, stood and moved quietly toward the sound. The carpet under her feet was thick enough to hide the creak of age, but her pulse thrummed loud in her ears, that old courtroom rhythm returning like muscle memory. She stopped by the slightly open door. Through the narrow gap, the hallway light spilled in a thin golden line, cutting across the darkness like a blade. Inside, Clara knelt beside her daughter's bed, her voice low but firm, rehearsed like a script. "Sweetheart," she said softly, brushing Chloe's hair from her forehead. "When the nice lady asks you tomorrow, you have to tell her Daddy can't take care of you, okay?" Chloe's small voice trembled. "But Daddy's nice. He reads to me." Clara sighed, annoyed. "I know, baby, but Daddy's sick. He's sad all the time. And Grandma, she doesn't live here anymore. It's just you and me now." There was a pause. Then the rustle of sheets as Chloe sat up. "So, if I say that, can Daddy come home later?" Clara froze for half a second, just long enough for Sylvia to see the truth beneath the motherly mask. Then she smiled that artificial smile again. "Of course, honey. Later." Sylvia's hands clenched at her sides. Her throat tightened, not from anger alone, but heartbreak. This wasn't strategy. It was cruelty disguised as love. Her fingers found the handle of her old briefcase leaning against the wall beside her. The leather creaked faintly as she gripped it, a sound that somehow made her feel grounded again. In that moment, everything inside her stilled. They say we inherit what our parents teach us, but lies are the only legacy that never fades. She stepped back from the door before Clara could turn around her face, half lit by the amber hallway light. For a moment, her reflection in the picture frame on the wall looked like a ghost, haunting her own past. She exhaled once, slow and deliberate. Then under her breath, a whisper laced with dry humor, the kind that made her courtroom opponent's sweat-noted counselor. Downstairs, the kitchen light flickered to life. Sylvia poured herself another cup of burnt coffee, her ritual of choice whenever truth started to rot. Her mind was already spinning through the timeline court, hearing custody, petition, property transfer, all pieces of the same puzzle Clara had built out of deceit. But this, teaching a child to lie in sworn testimony that wasn't just manipulation, it was perjury by proxy. She stared at her reflection in the kitchen window, the darkness outside framing her like a portrait. "I built a system that punishes people for less," she muttered. Her phone sat on the counter, face down. For years, that little device had been silent. No investigations, no late-night tips, no calls from agents who still called her ma'am, even after retirement. Tonight, it came alive again. Sylvia flipped it over, scrolling through her old contacts until she found the name she hadn't dialed in over a decade, Aiden Pierce, private investigator, former NYPD, part-time cynic, full-time realist. She hesitated for only a moment, then tapped call. 3 rings, then a sleepy, familiar voice. If this isn't about bail money, it's too late. Sylvia smiled. Still allergic to greetings, I see. A pause, then laughter. Well, I'll be damned. Sylvia Moreno, the dragon lady of Manhattan herself. I thought you'd retired to somewhere warm, maybe terrorizing seagulls. Tempting, she said dryly. But turns out justice doesn't do retirement. Justice or revenge, he teased. Same paperwork, different filing date. He chuckled, then his tone shifted. You sound serious. I am Sylvia said, walking toward the study and closing the door behind her. My daughter-in-law is coaching my granddaughter to commit perjury. My son's been declared unfit, and someone's been forging property transfers under his name. That's quite a combo meal, Aiden muttered. Where do I come in? I need surveillance. Financial tracing. Discreet. You sure you want back in that mess? She took a deep breath. Aiden, when someone rewrites your family into fiction, you don't edit the story, you publish the truth. There was a pause. Then his voice dropped, low serious now. All right, old friend. I'll dust off my trench coat. Where do we start? Sylvia looked around the study, the photos, the ledgers, the shadows. Start with Clara Ruiz Moreno, she said. I want every account, every text, every contact. Follow the money and you'll find the motive. Same as old times, he murmured. You know, when you call me, it's never about something small. I don't do small. That's what I'm afraid of. Sylvia smiled faintly, staring at the flickering lamp on the desk. Don't worry, Aiden. This time it's not war. He snorted. Sure. You always say that before the fireworks. After hanging up, Sylvia sat in silence for a while. The house was still again, too still. Upstairs, a faint whimper escaped Chloe's room, followed by Clara's footsteps padding down the hall. A door closed. Sylvia let the sound settle in her bones. Then she reached into her briefcase, pulling out her old recorder, a relic from her days as a prosecutor. She flicked it on, tested the mic. Click. The red light blinked. She spoke softly, her voice steady, deliberate. Case file Ruiz Moreno v. Moreno. Preliminary observation, psychological manipulation of minor. Evidence to follow. She turned off the recorder, placed it beside her coffee mug, and leaned back. They think they can out-talk truth. But truth, real truth, doesn't need a microphone. It just waits for the right witness. Her phone buzzed again, a text from Aiden. I'm in. 6 a.m. start. And Sylvia? Welcome back. Sylvia smiled to herself, the faintest curve of triumph at the corner of her lips. She looked toward the ceiling where Chloe slept, then whispered to the dark, I'm back in business. By sunrise, Sylvia's kitchen had turned into a miniature war room. Legal pads spread like blueprints, espresso machine hissing like a tired accomplice, and her laptop open to a web of documents that would make the IRS sweat. Across from her, Aiden Pierce stirred sugar into his 3rd cup of coffee. His trench coat was draped over the chair, his sleeves rolled up and his eyes sharp, but amused, followed her every move. You sure you retired? He asked. Because you still interrogate better than half the force. Sylvia didn't look up. Retirement just means I build differently. He laughed. God, I miss this version of you, the one who can make caffeine nervous. Less flirting, more tracing, she said, pushing a file toward him. Clara Ruiz Moreno's financials. I want every transaction since last June cross-checked against Benjamin Cole. Aiden froze. Benjamin Cole. As in the Benjamin Cole CEO of the biotech firm your son's company partnered with. Sylvia hummed. Apparently, professional ethics don't survive luxury cruises. Exterior cafe terrace, morning light cutting through the fog. Sylvia and Aiden sit with laptops open, surveillance camera footage on screen. Clara's Mercedes pulls up to a private marina. Cheaters always forget the ocean has reflections. Aiden following Clara's car through downtown traffic. His voice crackles through the earpiece. Target heading westbound, probably meeting her new business partner. Sylvia calmly sipping espresso in the passenger seat. I hope he's better at mergers than morality. interior hotel lobby security feed. Clara walks in hand with a tall man in a dark suit, Benjamin Cole. They pause for a kiss before disappearing into the elevator. Sylvia leans closer to the screen, eyes narrowing, and there's your motive lust wrapped in stock options. Aiden smirks. You want me to confront them record or just enjoy the awkwardness? Neither, she said coolly. Let's get the money trail. Lust can't buy yachts. Fraud can. They spent the afternoon parked in Aiden's battered SUV across from the Cole & Partners building. The car smelled faintly of old coffee and bad decisions. Sylvia typed quietly, her fingers flying over the keys as she hacked through public registries and offshore filings with surgical precision. Aiden watched, impressed. You ever think of teaching a class I did, she said dryly. It was called cross-examination. He snorted. Still terrifying, still effective. 3:14 p.m. Clara's Mercedes rolled up to the underground parking garage. Aiden adjusted the camera lens as Sylvia scrolled through her phone, following a ping from the GPS tracker hidden in Clara's car. She's meeting Cole again, Aiden muttered. Same spot. Sylvia's voice was calm, controlled. Follow the line of credit. The affair's just the garnish. He frowned. You think this is about more than love? I don't think I know. Love doesn't open shell corporations in the Caymans. They waited. Minutes passed. Then Clara emerged, sunglasses on phone pressed to her ear. She slid into her car and drove off. Aiden followed at a distance. Clara made 2 stops, a bank branch downtown and an upscale wine boutique. Nothing screams innocence like rosé and wire transfers, Aiden said. Sylvia didn't laugh. Get closer. I want to see which account she's using. Aiden parked across the street while Sylvia zoomed in with her camera. Clara handed a document to the teller. Sylvia caught a glimpse of the signature through the window, neat, familiar handwriting. Her breath hitched. Oh, you clever little parasite. What, she's not transferring her own funds, Sylvia said. She's using Brandon's name, his accounts, his digital ID. She's forging his consent. Aiden whistled low. So she's building a fake portfolio under your son's identity? Sylvia nodded, fury sharp behind her calm tone. She's setting him up unstable husband fake investments tax fraud. When it implodes, it looks like his crime. Aiden rubbed his temples. That's disturbingly smart. Criminals usually are, Sylvia murmured, until they forget who designed the system. They returned to Sylvia's home base, the kitchen that now looked like a law enforcement bunker. She plugged in a small USB drive, labeling it with her usual precision, RM Fraud Ace Boive. The screen glowed with number screenshots and security footage. Clara's signature, the account IDs, timestamps all neatly organized. Aiden leaned over. That's enough to bury her. Sylvia didn't respond. Her face was lit only by the monitor's pale glow. He studied her. You're not just doing this for Brandon, are you? Her eyes flicked to him, cold and honest. No, I'm doing it because lies rot everything they touch. You let one slide, and soon you're living in a landfill. Aiden nodded slowly. You ever get scared, Sylvia? She smiled faintly. Only when the espresso machine stops working. Sylvia sat alone in her office, the USB drive now tucked safely in her pocket, the faint click of her pen echoing in the quiet. She pulled out an envelope, plain unmarked, and slid inside a printed dossier. Clara's fake account records the hotel photos, the wire transfers. Then she sealed it hand steady. The label read only 2 words, Detective Brooks. She hesitated for a moment, her gaze drifting to the framed photograph of Brandon and Chloe on the bookshelf. Father and daughter laughing in a park before betrayal turned laughter into leverage. Her voice soft but steady. If justice can't protect the innocent, it can at least haunt the guilty. She rose, walked to the door, and set the envelope in her outgoing mail bin. The rain had begun again outside, tapping lightly against the window, rhythmic, almost like applause. Aiden's text arrived seconds later. Aiden, you still awake? Sylvia, barely. Aiden, good. Because this is the part where things start getting loud. Sylvia smirked, sipping her last shot of espresso. They always do. She looked down at the sealed envelope one last time before turning off the lamp. Evidence doesn't sleep. It just waits for courage to open the file. The light clicked off. Only the faint blue of the monitor remained and the small red indicator blinking on the USB drive like a heartbeat. The courtroom smelled like polish and nerves. Rows of oak benches creaked under the shifting weight of reporters' relatives and neighbors who'd come for the show, a public dissection of one broken family. The fluorescent lights hummed. Cameras weren't officially allowed, but the whisper of smartphones, flicking to silent mode, betrayed everyone's real intention. Sylvia sat quietly on the last row, her worn leather briefcase resting beside her feet. From where she sat, she could see the faint tremor in Brandon's hand as he adjusted his crutch, trying to steady himself at the plaintiff's table. Across from him, Clara Ruiz Moreno looked immaculate. Emerald dress, pearl earrings, a posture rehearsed to perfection. She leaned toward her attorney, Beatrice Lang, all lipstick and smug, and whispered something that made both women smile. Sylvia recognized that kind of smile. She'd seen it in prosecutors who thought they'd already won. "Your Honor," Beatrice began her tone, syrupy but sharp. "My client has endured years of emotional and financial exhaustion caring for a man who—" She paused dramatically, lowering her gaze toward Brandon, "can no longer fulfill the role of husband or father. She has carried the household alone while he has become a burden." A collective murmur rippled through the courtroom. Brandon flinched. His knuckles whitened against the table. Sylvia's nails dug into her own palm, but she stayed seated, her eyes cold and unblinking. She'd promised herself she wouldn't move until the moment was right. Clara dabbed fake tears with a tissue. "I tried, Your Honor, but he won't work. He won't communicate." And his mother, her voice cracked strategically. "His mother refuses to leave our home." Someone in the back gasped. Another whispered, "Isn't that the ex-prosecutor lady?" Beatrice smirked. "We intend to prove that Mrs. Sylvia Moreno's interference has created a hostile environment unfit for a child." Brandon's lips moved soundlessly. He wanted to speak to defend his mother, but the tremor in his hands betrayed him. Sylvia inhaled through her nose. Calm. Always calm before the strike. The judge, Honor Leonard Caldwell, leaned forward. His face was stern, but his tone neutral. "Ms. Lang, the court expects evidence, not melodrama. Is the counsel for the respondent ready?" Beatrice gave a condescending smile. "Of course, Your Honor, unless someone plans a ghost comeback." A few people chuckled. Phones lifted discreetly. Clara smiled. The moment hung in the air, and then the sound came from the aisle. A single deliberate sound. All heads turned. Sylvia stood, straight-backed, unhurried, her silver hair tied neatly, her tailored navy suit catching the light like quiet armor. She walked down the center aisle, each step echoing against the marble floor. When she reached the counsel table, she placed her old leather briefcase on it with another solid thud. Beatrice blinked. "Excuse me, ma'am, this is a closed representation." Sylvia's voice cut cleanly through the air. "Not anymore." Judge Caldwell froze mid-note. His pen hovered. "Ms. Moreno." "You're representing my son," she said simply. The room erupted gasps, whispers, the click of camera shutters despite the bailiff's warnings. Phones were already raised, recording what felt like a cinematic resurrection. Brandon looked up in shock. "Mom?" She placed a hand on his shoulder, firm, steady. "Focus on breathing, not begging," she whispered. Clara's face drained of color. Beatrice tried to recover her composure. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Mrs. Moreno has been out of practice for over a decade." Caldwell's expression shifted between disbelief and reluctant respect. Nevertheless, he said slowly, "If the proper substitution of counsel has been filed," Sylvia slid a paper across the table. "Filed this morning, with the clerk's timestamp." Beatrice's jaw dropped. "You planned this?" Sylvia finally looked at her eyes, glacial. "I prepare, Ms. Lang. I don't plan. Planning is what amateurs call guessing. In the back row, Aiden Pierce leaned casually against the wall, chewing gum like a man watching live theater. His phone buzzed in his hand as he sent a quick text, "Aiden." And just like that, ratings skyrocket. Sylvia's phone vibrated once in her pocket. She didn't look. Caldwell adjusted his glasses. "Very well. The court acknowledges Mrs. Moreno as counsel for the plaintiff. Let's proceed." Sylvia opened her briefcase. The faint smell of old paper and ink filled the air, the scent of truth and danger. "Your Honor." She began her tone, even almost gentle, before my colleague continues reciting her fairy tale. "I'd like to request an evidentiary clarification regarding financial transfers tied to an account ending in 0427. Beatrice blinked. "That's irrelevant." Sylvia interrupted her gaze sharp. "It's fraudulent. You'll find the proof on file dated 2 days before this hearing." A gasp rippled through the benches again. Clara stiffened. Caldwell frowned, flipping through the folder a clerk handed him. "Interesting. This appears to be a duplicate account under Mr. Brandon Moreno's name." Sylvia nodded calmly. "Created without his consent. By his wife." Clara's voice cracked. "That's a lie." Sylvia turned her tone still measured. "Funny word, isn't it, lie? Some teach it to children. Others build their marriages on it." Even the stenographer paused for a second before continuing to type. Brandon lowered his eyes, tears threatening, but Sylvia squeezed his hand under the table. "Don't look down," she whispered. "You've already spent enough time there." Beatrice's face reddened. "Your Honor, this is a setup." Sylvia tilted her head slightly, smiling. That word again. Setup. Coming from a lawyer, that's almost a confession. Caldwell tapped his gavel once. "Order. We'll recess for 10 minutes while I review this submission." As the judge left, the entire courtroom broke into chaos. Reporters whispered, phones recorded, and Clara, pale and trembling, turned toward Beatrice. "What's happening?" she hissed. Beatrice whispered back, "I don't know. But your mother-in-law just turned this hearing into a crime scene." At the far end of the room, Aiden grinned, typing another message. "Aiden, front row seats to the resurrection of Sylvia Moreno. Worth every espresso." He hit send and slipped his phone into his pocket. Back at the table, Sylvia quietly gathered her papers, straightened them, and placed them into neat, perfect order. Then, almost to herself, she murmured, "Never interrupt a woman who's been underestimated twice." Brandon looked at her, eyes wide, a mix of awe and fear. "Mom, what are you doing?" She glanced toward the cameras, the murmuring crowd, and then back at him with a small, razor-edged smile. "Winning the opening act." Freeze-frame gasps, phones flashing, reporters scrambling for headlines. Voiceover Sylvia. "They mocked my son in open court. Now they'll learn what mockery sounds like when truth laughs back." The courtroom felt colder than usual that morning, as if the walls themselves knew that truth was about to walk in, uninvited. Judge Caldwell entered with his robe slightly wrinkled, a sign of a long night reviewing evidence. His gavel came down once, echoing like a warning. "Court is now in session." The reporters, who had filled every corner, leaned forward, their pens hovering. Brandon sat stiff beside his mother, eyes sunken from sleeplessness. Clara, by contrast, looked defiant. Hair, flawless nails, manicured confidence rehearsed. Sylvia sat perfectly still. Her briefcase rested before her like a relic of war. "Mrs. Moreno," Judge Caldwell said, adjusting his glasses, "you mentioned additional evidence yesterday. The court is ready to review it." Sylvia rose calm as a tide returning. "Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to submit an audio recording as Exhibit F, a direct statement made by the defendant, Clara Ruiz Moreno." Beatrice Lang immediately sprang up. "Objection, Your Honor. No authentication, no context." Sylvia didn't even glance at her. "Authentication will be self-evident within 5 seconds of playback." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Sylvia picked up her old USB drive, the one she'd labeled in her neat, cursive handwriting, "E.M. Fraud East Honor 5. She handed it to the bailiff with a faint smile, as if passing a loaded weapon. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly. The clerk pressed play. At first, just static. Then a familiar voice, sharp and impatient. "If you don't say it, we'll lose everything." The room went silent. "You have to tell them your daddy can't take care of you. Say he's sick. Say you don't want to stay with him. Understand." Then a small, trembling voice, Chloe's. "But Mommy, I love Daddy." Another pause. Then Clara's voice again, harder now, slicing through the air like broken glass. "Do you want to live miserably with that cripple and your old grandma, or do you want to have a real life?" The recording ended with a faint rustle, then silence. You could hear the air leave the room. Clara's lipstick smile disappeared. Her fingers twitched on the table. Beatrice looked like she'd swallowed a stone. Brandon's shoulders trembled. He lowered his head, but this time, not from shame. Relief flickered behind his eyes like a man finally exhaling after months underwater. Sylvia stood motionless, her voice soft but resonant. "Your Honor, the recording was captured on the evening of July 18th at approximately 10:27 p.m. You will note the voice print verification attached to the transcript. My client's daughter was coerced to lie under oath by her mother, the defendant, to falsify a custody claim." Beatrice tried to recover. "This is outrageous. Anyone can fabricate an audio clip. It could be AI, or Sylvia turned toward her, the faintest glimmer of a smile playing at the corner of her lips. You're right, Ms. Lang. Anyone could. But they didn't. Your client did." Judge Caldwell leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Mrs. Moreno, do you have corroborating evidence indeed?" Sylvia reached into her briefcase and pulled out a printed transcript, notarized, time-stamped, and signed by Detective Brooks. This was reviewed and verified by the precinct's Digital Forensics Division last night. Their report confirms the file is authentic. The judge scanned the document, then looked up at Clara. "Mrs. Ruiz Moreno, do you have any explanation for this recording?" Clara's mouth opened, then closed again. Her lawyer whispered something frantically, but Clara waved her off. It's taken out of context, she finally stammered. I was under stress." Sylvia's tone was razor sharp. "You don't threaten a child because of stress." The crowd murmured, not against Sylvia this time, but against Clara. A small sob echoed from the back row. Everyone turned. Chloe, sitting beside a court officer, had tears streaking her cheeks. Sylvia's heart clenched. She stepped toward her, gently kneeling down until they were eye level. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered. "Truth isn't scary. It's just quiet until someone listens." Chloe sniffled, looking at the judge. "Can I tell the truth now?" The room froze again. Caldwell hesitated, then nodded slowly. "You may, child." The bailiff escorted Chloe to the witness stand. Her small feet barely reached the floor. She gripped the edge of the chair, trembling, but her voice, though fragile, carried through the entire room. "My mom told me to say Daddy couldn't take care of me," she said, wiping her nose. "But he can. He reads me stories. He makes pancakes even when it hurts. He always smiles when I wake up." Tears welled in Brandon's eyes. Sylvia stayed still, her hand gripping the table until her knuckles turned white. Chloe continued, "Grandma says lying makes people sick inside. I don't want to be sick anymore." Her words landed like thunder in slow motion. Every reporter, every spectator, every juror in the room felt the shift, the moral pendulum swinging. Beatrice buried her face in her notes. Clara's parents sank lower in their seats, and Judge Caldwell, for the first time in years, looked visibly moved. He tapped his pen once. "That will be sufficient, young lady. You've been very brave." Chloe nodded, then turned her gaze toward Sylvia. "Can I go to Daddy now?" Sylvia smiled softly. "Yes, darling, you can." The judge called for recess. Reporters bolted for the doors, phones buzzing with breaking news notifications. Out in the hallway, Aiden Pierce was already surrounded by journalists. He had his signature grin plastered on. "Mr. Pierce, you're the investigator working with Mrs. Moreno, correct? Can you comment on the recording?" Aiden adjusted his tie. "Comment. Sure. Guess who just nuked her own case? Laughter rippled through the press crowd. Cameras flashed. One reporter shouted, "So Mrs. Moreno's back for good." Aiden smirked. Back. She never really left. Justice just took a nap. Back inside, Sylvia sat beside Brandon. For the first time in months, his shoulders looked lighter. He turned to her, voice shaky. "Mom, you saved us." She shook her head gently. "No." Truth did. She reached for the recorder still sitting on the table, its red light blinking softly, and slipped it back into her briefcase. Lies shout. Truth whispers. But once it speaks, the world has no choice but to listen. The gavel struck once more. The crowd quieted. Judge Caldwell's tone was calm, but his words hit like verdicts. The court finds probable cause for further investigation into Mrs. Ruiz Moreno's actions. Custody hearing is suspended pending review. Clara's head dropped. Brandon exhaled, and Sylvia, silent, composed, victorious, simply adjusted her glasses and whispered under her breath, almost smiling, "Your move, counselor." For a long moment, no one moved. The weight of the recording still hung heavy in the courtroom air like smoke after an explosion. Reporters whispered. Beatrice whispered even faster. Clara's face, pale and trembling, hardened suddenly with the cold fury of someone cornered. And then she struck. Of course she knows how to manipulate evidence. Clara shouted, her voice echoing off the marble walls. She's a disgraced prosecutor. She ruined her own husband's life. Gasps rippled through the room. Sylvia didn't flinch, but behind her stillness, an old wound opened, one she had buried so deep that even the sound of his name could once unmake her. Judge Caldwell banged the gavel. Order. But Clara wasn't finished. Everyone acts like she's some hero now. You think I didn't do my research? Ask her about Elliot Moreno. Ask how her brilliant career ended when she handed her husband over to the feds. The silence that followed was deafening. Reporters scribbled faster. Beatrice tried to shush her client, but it was too late. The words were already loose, sharp, irreversible. Sylvia closed her eyes. Rain lashed against the glass windows of the district attorney's office. Sylvia, younger then, but just as unyielding, stood in the dim light of her office files, stacked like barricades around her. Her husband Elliot, a defense attorney with charm and expensive cufflinks, leaned in the doorway, his smile thin. "You can't win this one," he said softly. "The department's compromised, and you know it." She didn't look up. "Then I'll clean it." Elliot sighed. "You'll burn everything, including us. I'd rather lose my marriage than lose my integrity." He took a step closer, eyes shadowed. "What if I've already made sure you lose both?" Sylvia's hand froze above her papers. "What did you do?" He smiled, the kind of smile that used to charm juries and destroy opponents. "I did what you wouldn't. I made a deal." Her voice broke just once, with them that night, when she walked into court and watched her case collapse, because the defense already knew every piece of evidence. She didn't weep. She just stared at the floor, her badge burning in her pocket, like guilt made of metal. They called it betrayal. She called it a confirmation. Sylvia straightened, every trace of emotion folded neatly away. "Your Honor," she said quietly, "since my personal history has been raised, I'd like to clarify it for the record." Beatrice smirked. "Be my guest." Sylvia stepped forward. Her voice was low, but it carried to the last row. 15 years ago, I lost a case because the man I married sold sealed evidence to the opposing counsel. That man was disbarred, and I resigned from the DA's office the next day. Murmurs spread. Phones recorded every word. They called it a scandal, she continued. They said I destroyed my husband's career. What they forgot to mention was that he destroyed the truth first. I simply refused to help him bury it. Caldwell, who had been silent until now, slowly removed his glasses. "Mrs. Moreno," he said, his voice breaking the stillness. "I remember that case." All eyes turned to him. "You were defending the integrity of the court," he continued. "You saved this bench," he pointed to himself, his tone tightening from the same corruption your husband fell into. Whispers swept through the courtroom like wind through dry leaves. Even Beatrice looked stunned. Sylvia blinked, not expecting the judge's words. Caldwell went on, standing now, his voice firm and solemn. "At that time, I was a junior prosecutor under your supervision. You don't remember me, but I remember the day you turned in your badge. You told me, if truth costs you everything, it's still cheaper than silence. I built my entire career on that." The reporters froze mid-note. Even the court officer looked up, suddenly aware this was no longer just a trial, it was vindication. Clara's defiance faltered. This is ridiculous." Caldwell's gavel struck once, silencing her. "No, Mrs. Ruiz Moreno. What's ridiculous is trying to use a woman's integrity against her." Sylvia exhaled slowly. Decades of buried shame washed clean by a single sentence. She turned to Brandon, who had been staring at her like he was seeing his mother for the first time, not as the caretaker, the quiet strength, but as the woman who once took on giants and walked away standing. His lips parted. "Mom, you never told me." She smiled faintly. "You were too young to understand betrayal." Then softly, "Now you know who your mother really is." Tears slipped down his cheeks, not from pain but pride. A hush settled across the courtroom. No one dared break it. Even the clicking cameras stopped. Clara sat frozen, her painted confidence cracking. Beatrice leaned in and whispered urgently, "We need to settle now." But Clara only stared at Sylvia, her face contorted in disbelief. "You think this makes you a hero?" Sylvia turned to her with quiet composure. "No, it makes me accountable. Try it sometime." A few reporters chuckled. Judge Caldwell smiled faintly, then spoke. "This court will recess until tomorrow morning. I suggest both counsels prepare some truths, require more paperwork than others." Outside the courtroom, Sylvia walked down the marble steps, the late afternoon sun spilling over the courthouse lawn. Aiden was waiting by his car, hands in his pockets, smirking. "You know, he said I've seen a lot of comebacks. But this was biblical." Sylvia raised an eyebrow. "You exaggerate. Do I, a fallen prosecutor redeemed in open court backed by the very judge she once trained, I half expected trumpets." She chuckled softly, a sound rare enough to make him grin wider. "Don't start writing my eulogy yet, Pierce. We still have a trial to win." He tilted his head. "Fair, but you already won something bigger." She looked out toward the courthouse doors where Brandon and Chloe emerged, hand in hand, sunlight glinting off the steps around them. "Yes," she murmured, "the truth. Voice over Sylvia. They called it a loss. I called it a lesson. And some lessons never stop teaching." The morning of the verdict dawned gray and heavy, as if the city itself held its breath. Rain misted over the courthouse steps, turning marble slick and silver. Sylvia stood at the base of those stairs for a moment, her old briefcase in hand, watching Brandon help little Chloe up each step one by one. She had been in this building 1,000 times before as a prosecutor, a witness, a mother. But today she was something rarer, a survivor of justice that finally remembered her name. Inside the courtroom was already overflowing. Reporters lined the walls. Clara's parents sat stiffly in the front row, avoiding eye contact. The press whispered about the Moreno trial, about the recording, about the redemption arc they hadn't seen coming. Judge Caldwell entered, gavel in hand, face solemn but steady. "All rise." The sound of shuffling feet filled the chamber. Sylvia looked across the room to where Clara sat, composed but hollow-eyed, her lawyer, Beatrice fanning through papers that could no longer save her. When Caldwell spoke, his tone carried the weight of finality. "This court has reviewed the evidence, including financial records, voice recordings, and testimony presented under oath. After due deliberation." He paused long enough for the air to tighten, for Clara to grip the edge of her table. "The court finds that Mrs. Clara Ruiz Moreno acted in bad faith. Her coercion of a minor witness fraudulent financial activity and moral misconduct make her unfit for custodial responsibility. A gasp broke out. Cameras clicked. Caldwell continued steady and calm. Custody of minor Chloe Moreno is hereby granted to her father, Mr. Brandon Moreno. The residence at 214 Grove Street, formerly held jointly, will remain under Mr. Moreno's full ownership. Mrs. Ruiz Moreno is permitted supervised visitation pending further review by Family Services. The room erupted. Reporters leapt to their feet. A murmur swept through the benches, justice, disbelief, vindication all mixing into one stunned chorus. Clara rose, face flushed. "It's not fair," she shouted. "He's crippled. He can't take care of her. He's not me." A bailiff took a step forward, but Caldwell lifted his gavel slightly. "You're right, Mrs. Ruiz Moreno," he said evenly. "He's not you. That's why his daughter still trusts him." Laughter rippled through the crowd before fading into the hum of shock. Beatrice tugged at Clara's sleeve, whispering frantically, but Clara yanked her arm away, her voice rising to a shriek. "You'll regret this, all of you. That woman," she pointed at Sylvia, "ruined my life." Sylvia stayed seated, composed, her hands folded neatly atop her briefcase. From the back of the courtroom, Aiden Pierce leaned against the door frame, smirking. He turned to a nearby reporter and murmured, "For once court and life agree." The reporter nearly snorted, trying not to laugh. Caldwell rapped the gavel. "Order. This is a courtroom, not a theater," Aiden whispered again. "Could have fooled me." Sylvia heard him and almost smiled. As the noise died down, Brandon turned toward his mother. His lips trembled, words forming slowly, like a man relearning how to breathe. We won." Sylvia's gaze remained on the judge's bench, her tone calm, reverent. "Justice doesn't clap, Brandon. It breathes." He frowned softly. "What does that mean?" She turned to him, eyes warm. "It means this isn't the sound of victory. It's the sound of balance being restored." He nodded his hand, finding hers. The gavel struck again, closing the case. Court is adjourned. Everything afterward felt muted, like a dream running underwater. Reporters rushed forward, microphones flashing. Clara stormed past, shouting at anyone who'd listen. Beatrice slipped away quietly. Caldwell approached Sylvia before leaving the bench. "Mrs. Moreno," he said, lowering his voice, "you reminded this court why it exists. Don't disappear again." She smiled faintly. "I never do. I just go quiet until needed." He nodded, the faintest grin touching his tired face. "God help the next fool who underestimates you." As he walked away, Aiden joined her by the aisle. "Well, he said I'd say that's your retirement come back complete." Sylvia glanced toward Brandon and Chloe, who were hugging near the exit, sunlight catching the gold in her son's hair. "Retirement," she murmured. "No, just a recess." Aiden chuckled. "Careful. The world's going to start expecting sequels." Then she said, picking up her briefcase, "They'll learn justice has good writing." Outside, the courthouse doors opened to a burst of light. Brandon wheeled forward, Chloe perched on his lap, laughing, her laughter clear, high, and free of the tremor that had filled their home for months. Sylvia followed a few paces behind her heels, tapping softly on the marble. For the first time in years, she wasn't walking toward a battle. She was walking toward peace. Camera shutters clicked again, but slower this time, reverent. The reporters didn't yell questions. They just watched. Aiden raised his phone, pretending to record. "Smile, Counselor Moreno," he teased. "You just became every defense lawyer's worst bedtime story." Sylvia laughed quietly. "Then sweet dreams to them." Brandon turning to look back at her. Sylvia stopping mid-step. Their eyes meet a silent understanding, passing between mother and son. The world fades to stillness. The chaos, the judgment, the noise gone. Only the echo of what they'd fought for remained. The world mistook silence for surrender. But silence was just the breath before the verdict. She watches her son and granddaughter disappear through the courthouse doors, sunlight haloing them. Her hand tightens around the briefcase once more, not as a weapon, but as memory. Justice had exhaled. Spring sunlight spilled through the kitchen window, painting the walls in soft gold. The world felt quieter now. No courtrooms, no cameras, no voices raised in judgment. Just the sound of water boiling and the faint rustle of wind through the backyard. Sylvia carried a tray outside 2 mugs of coffee and 1 small glass of orange juice balanced neatly on it. The air smelled of salt and citrus. Brandon was standing near the porch, 1 crutch tucked under his arm, carefully shifting his weight as he took a slow, measured step forward. The brace on his leg gleamed faintly in the morning light. 2 more steps and you'll be officially faster than the mailman, Sylvia teased. He laughed a low sound of genuine warmth. You always did set the bar too high. From across the yard, Chloe's voice rang out bright and full of life. Grandma, the tree has oranges? Sylvia turned. The young orange tree they had planted nearly a year ago, back when their lives were falling apart, now shimmered with green leaves and small bursts of color. Tiny fruits hung like promises. She smiled. The tree we planted is finally giving fruit. Chloe tugged at her sleeve. Can I pick one? Not yet. Sylvia said, kneeling beside her. They're not ripe. Some things need time to be sweet. The 3 of them sat together on the porch steps. Brandon sipped his coffee slowly. Chloe twirled a leaf between her fingers. Sylvia leaned back, closing her eyes. The hum of bees and the crash of distant waves filled the silence. For once, there was nothing to fight. A faint vibration broke the stillness, Sylvia's phone buzzing on the table. She glanced at the screen and smirked. It was Aiden Pierce calling over video. She swiped to answer. Detective Pierce. Early for trouble, aren't you, Aiden? Grinned through the screen, the background noise of the city behind him. You're trending again, Queen of Law. Justice Moreno top 5 on legal TikTok. Sylvia groaned playfully. God help us all. You should see the comments. Half the country thinks you should run for office. I prefer gardener now, she replied, turning the camera toward the orange tree. Less corruption, better fruit. Aiden laughed. Touché. Just don't start cross-examining the fertilizer. Only if it lies, she shot back. They shared a quiet smile, 2 people bound by war stories, now learning how to live between battles. Take care of yourself, Sylvia, he said before hanging up. The world needs fewer martyrs and more teachers. She nodded softly. Then I'll start with my family. Later that afternoon, Brandon rested in a chair under the tree, reading while Chloe built a tiny fort from fallen branches. Sylvia tended to the garden, pruning, watering, humming an old melody. Her hands, once accustomed to files and evidence, now smelled faintly of soil and lemon balm. Every snip of the shears, every motion felt like rewriting her past in gentler ink. Brandon looked up from his book. You ever miss it? She glanced at him. The courtroom. He nodded. Sometimes, she admitted. But justice doesn't just happen in court. Sometimes it happens right here when a family gets another chance to breathe. Chloe bounded over, holding a single orange in her small hands. Look, Grandma. This one fell off. Sylvia took it gently, examining the soft, imperfect peel. Then, maybe it's ready. She handed it back to Chloe. Go ahead, taste it. Chloe bit into the fruit and squinted. It's a little sour. Sylvia chuckled. That's okay. The first harvest always is. Sweetness comes later. Brandon met her eyes, understanding what she really meant. He smiled, quiet, proud, grateful. As evening crept in, Sylvia poured the last of the coffee into her mug. The sun dipped low, turning the sky a deep orange that matched the fruit on the tree. She looked at her son and granddaughter framed in that light symbols of everything she had nearly lost, everything she had regained. They mocked my son, but truth has a longer memory than lies. Justice sometimes sleeps. It never dies. The wind rustled the branches above her. Petals drifted down like confetti. She stood brushing soil from her palms and placed one hand on the trunk of the young orange tree. It was steady, rooted, alive. For the first time in a long time, So was she. A wide view of the small backyard the old prosecutor turned gardener tending her tree, her family laughing nearby, the sky melting into the color of renewal. If you've ever had to fight quietly for what's right, tell me where you're watching from.